Life is Strange came out at practically the perfect time, 2015, a time where I was stupider, coming up from the disappointing season 2 of the Walking Dead Telltale games, which lacked a huge component when it comes to the player feeling responsible for the events of the story. Despite the fact that the game has too many decisions, the fact of the matter was that all throughout the season, the game was designed to funnel the player towards the same conclusion, the most important decision in the game being whether or not to help this random girl who actually does nothing towards the game's conflict. It left players wishing for more, and not just because it ended on something of a cliffhanger. Like, the genre of choose-your-own adventure cinematic games needed an evolution from the way it's executed during the first Walking Dead game. The Wolf Among Us from 2013 kinda proved what the non-choices gameplay could go, but the game that really doubled down on the whole concept was Quantic Dream's Beyond Two Souls, which was already the company's third go at this type of game. Their prior one, Heavy Rain, didn't reach the level of popularity The Walking Dead did, partly due to its weight, but also the popularity of the Walking Dead IP played a part, for sure. This third game released at the peak of the niche's newfound popularity, and thus actually gave players a look into what this genre could be like when stretched further. The thing about Beyond Two Souls was mostly that the game's storytelling was weirdly complicated, as well as the fact that unlike the Telltale titles, these would release all in one go. That led to the hype around Quantic's games being less stretched out, and thus the experience of following the games very different. That's not all, it also managed to be too involved for some players. Making the right decisions in Telltale's titles usually comes down to some sort of social or moral choice, whereas both Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls had outcomes that were based on the player's performance during certain segments or even their ability to notice and solve puzzles. It just didn't have the same feel, which had players expecting Telltale's second season to bridge that gap between complex and varied scenarios for each playthrough and the more simplified gameplay and decision making that made watching others experience the games a lot more entertaining. For example, in Beyond Two Souls there's this part where you gotta navigate a fire and do quick time events and know where to go in order to save these guys, whereas in Walking Dead you just have to not pick the wrong option, silly. Nothing to do with the fact that potato PCs could run Telltale's titles but not Quantic Dreams. Shut up, this is not a blatant bias created from my economic woes. So in-game Life is Strange during 2015 and immediately began capturing the hearts of players. Not only did it nail the angsty, nostalgic vibe from too many people's teenage years, but the characters in it were interesting and the story was down to earth. Even though the characters in Life is Strange can experience paranormal events and even hold guns too, the framing and environment wasn't actively hostile to the characters, which made the actual decision making seem grounded and realistic. It put players in the shoes of an 18-year-old girl, metaphorically. I don't think my massive feet could fit in a 6.5. That's not getting into the most interesting part of the game, which was the main gimmick that quite literally drives the story along. In this game, players have the ability to rewind time, and the protagonist, Max Caulfield, I'm gonna pronounce this wrong many times throughout the video and I hope you ignore me. Whatever, she uses this ability at the start of the game to save her best friend Chloe Price. See, I call her Chloe, not Chloe, so you know I know some English. This rewinding mechanic brought a freshness to the game simply because it let players change their mind. If they didn't like a choice they made, the game outright let them rewind and choose differently. That's the magic part about it. Through this decision, they basically promised right then and there that by the story's design, your decisions will have long-term effects on the story. The game played a lot, at least in the mind of players, with the differentiation between immediate and long-term repercussions. Even if you didn't like what happened immediately after the choice, you would consider that against what effects it could have on the future. For example, in episode 1, the player has the ability to snap some unflattering photos of Victoria, who is this classical mean girl stereotype at the start of the game before you see her development. Posting these pictures makes Victoria a consistent annoyance throughout a lot of the playthrough. She will constantly shit on Max, hate her, and constantly attempt to cyberbully her. But it also makes it impossible to get Victoria killed all the way in episode 4. This particular situation is the objectively correct choice in the long term, with it being objectively incorrect during much of the story, making it a layered decision regardless of its real impact on the story. The shift in your perception of it is what mattered. Now, with such a fresh gameplay and visual aspect, the final hurdle this game had to clear was regarding the writing and characters, which was actually fucking awesome. Aiming for a drama where death as a permanent outcome was rare really helped make the writing unable to rely on just killing characters over a single choice. It's to the extent where there's a point in the game where you can neglect to rewind someone's death, and as a result the game kinda crashes into 4 different problems because it's written with the expectation that most players won't encounter that scenario. The game even tells you to rewind right after. The point is that in avoiding these outcomes being too common. The way to writing an overall better story was paved in gold, not the dialogue. I guess I must confess and be honest, while rechecking the game for this video, I figured the dialogue actually aged super well, because despite it abusing awkward slang all the time, the slang is no longer common, so a lot of the lines that used to be really cringy are now just natural. It's kinda like a crazy unique quirk of the game now. Chloe and Max as protagonists work exceptionally well, not only through their actions and personality, but also through their dynamic. Chloe is hot-headed and bold, while Max is more analytical and can rewind time, allowing both characters to put themselves in harm's way throughout the entire story and still be perfectly safe. It makes their pairing naturally move the story along and allows them to go in unexpected directions at any moment. Chloe is arguably not a heroine, she's a wit if anything, but I mostly mean it in the sense that she gets angry at almost any decision you make that isn't for her benefit, constantly displays immoral and selfish behavior, is manipulative and insults Max for taking the reasonable route, and keeps aggravating most problems she finds herself in for literally no reason. Good news is that at least you both get to throw each other under the bus, or I guess train in this case. That makes her such a strong driving force for the plot, because the reason why she does all of these rebellious things is unique to Choose Your Own Adventure games. Typically, characters are erratic because they have been backed up against the wall, they exist with the threat of death looming over them or someone they love, and thus it's not surprising if they bend their morals a little bit backwards. Meanwhile, the stakes in Life is Strange are a lot more tangible, at least in the initial parts of the game. Pretty subdued stuff actually, whether or not this girl's gonna pull you for a while. It let the writing team explore psychology with more accuracy, and the payoff is that the game easily delivers on the drama and unexpected moments, particularly for those moments where shit actually gets real and hits the fan and somehow buzzes directly into Eliza's nose. These events happen more and more as you approach the end of the game, leading to a natural sense of rising tension that isn't too obstructive but still keeps the story and its events on a build-up. And Chloe is kind of a perfect representation of this. She is a character that exists with some heavy walls around her to protect herself from further pain that you slowly pick up on during the course of the game, making her decisions even more erratic. This helps make the dramatic potential ever so present, while also chipping into these coming-of-age elements in the story, what it means to grow up and make decisions, the difficulty of relationships, and it does all of this thanks to the psychological weight the characters have and will be forced to endure. At the end of the day, even Chloe allows herself to lay back, let it happen, and remember to breathe. This is not the message other games in the genre aimed for. Those other games were about keeping everybody alive. This game isn't. And that's precisely what made this story here worthwhile. That's what shaped this game's style and personality, and a large part about what made the game feel so special. This inspired the inclusion of all of those iconic sit-down as copyrighted music to fuck up YouTubers up plays. It even inspired a heightened sense of attention to detail that brings the setting alive by having characters react to events through their social media and environments. Even the secondary and tertiary characters in this game managed to hit those necessary dramatic, thematic, and psychological beats. It was extremely efficient at that. I also think this game had at least one final bit of something that brought it up to people's attentions as it was releasing. I did mention this game came out right after Season 2 of The Walking Dead, and you may think that's all it would take to capture the fandom over, but you'd only be right to a degree. The cliffhangers in this game are kinda banger. Say what you will, but having to pause in between episodes of a show or game has a lot of potential to grow an audience. Here's where I'd put my rant about the disastrous release of Stone Ocean's anime if I was an asshole stretching the video to reach those 8 minutes, which haha, hello, we're at the 8-minute mark. It really leaves the audience speculating about the events that will happen next, and Choose Your Own Adventure games had that added advantage that you would literally never know what the developers could do next season. I mean, in theory, your decisions and that other guy's decisions were different, right? I was absolutely fucking thrown aback when I finished chapters 3 and 4 of this game, since they both end on crazy awesome cliffhangers. Chapter 3 would end up on you rewinding time back to before Chloe's dad dies, saving him and traveling to a timeline where Chloe is quadriplegic, and then chapter 4 would end up revealing who the main antagonist was as Chloe fucking dies, and you also get kidnapped so you can't rewind and save her. This shit made me talk to everyone about how fucking good this game was shaping up to be, which worked a lot better than the cliffhanger Season 2 of The Walking Dead was trying to achieve. I just remember the whole situation with Krista and I am fucking steaming again, and don't get me started on Arvo, Mr. Literally nothing you do changes anything about him at all. That's probably the final element that sold people on this game being different from other Choose Your Own Adventure games. It actually felt like your actions and inactions had consequences, not only because the writers backed themselves into a corner by the game's premise, but also because the game made sure to deliver on the feel of those consequences for most of its release. Nothing showcases this better than Kate's death. which, if you're watching this and have no idea, slight trigger warning, she basically is bullied for the first 2 chapters, which drives her to jump off the school building at the end of chapter 2. Hold on, this video is looking a little bit foggier than usual. Yeah, the game has no graphic imagery about it. That was related to the part where I said I was steaming. There's nothing to censor here. Your decisions throughout the first 2 chapters have a chance to greatly improve the chances of getting Kate down from the ledge. The more you help her out and figure out what happened to her, the less options you get that can put her off during the conversation where you try to save her and not, This gave players a real fire to believe their actions had importance towards the events of the game. Even if her status only changes to particular prongs of the timeline, those compound actions giving you an advantage to avoid the unwanted scenario were everything. Another thing that makes this scene impactful is how the scene takes away Max's ability to rewind, an ability that you'll use all the time as you play the game, which highlights the stakes of this particular scene while the writers display that your ability isn't all-powerful. In short, the game gave you the impression that your decisions actually mattered and created buzz around itself through the seasonal cliffhangers. Following the game for the first 4 chapters was an absolute treat and immediately brought me back into the genre. Sadly, the release of Life is Strange 1 Chapter 5 was the last time in the last 10 years that I genuinely acclaimed the IP. In October 20th of 2015, Chapter 5 of Life is Strange released, and so with high hopes and having replayed the game to make sure I kept Kate alive and Victoria warned about the oncoming danger, I sat down and played. Come to the end of the chapter, I was frankly disappointed. Although the game had shown me before that my gameplay mattered, Chapter 5 fell almost completely flat in that regard. A lot of this episode takes place in alternate timelines, and the culmination of all of the choices you make throughout the game are reduced to a strange dream sequence that I found extremely uninteresting. One of the biggest gut punches is the scenes regarding Eliza, who is this character that you just kinda save from different happenings all throughout the game, and if you miss one of those opportunities, even if you helped her 3 of the 4 times you could, she still falls to her death over her fear of you specifically. I didn't encounter this cause I went back to save her, but when I saw the people get that scene, I was kinda sad. I understand the intent of the scene was to have you rewind time and save her one last time to parallel the role she had in every other chapter, but I still felt like that reward for being mindful of her was lackluster. It felt like the game was disrespecting my actions throughout the game, and disregarding them for a 50-50 outcome. Hearing that, you may see exactly what's coming if you're familiar with this game. The game ends on a single nuclear choice. You either let the entire town die from a tornado in true samurai fashion, all the things you did during the game except 1 or 2 going to waste, or you rewind back to the start of the game and let Chloe die. All of the things you did in the game going to waste. You see the problem here, right? The game basically slaps you over the face with the very reasons you began to enjoy it in the first place. Ultimately, your decisions didn't matter at all, and that doesn't sit right with me from a gameplay perspective. Still, there's a silver lining that makes this not as lamentable as it sounds. Thematically, it is the right ending. It comes together to discuss how sometimes you just gotta let shit be, and if shit is the death of your best friend, practically girlfriend, you're just gonna have to live with that. Sometimes life is simply unfair, don't you think? Max's arc throughout the game is all about that, encountered with the power that lets her choose in moments of distress, and it being ultimately useless for the real choices that would matter, just how it is for most people, a situation many of us begin to realize around this time in our lives. She has to learn that she isn't always in control, as Chloe puts it, chaos theory, which may sound super epic or kinda cute if you're a Sonic fan, but it's ultimately just the way things are. Through this viewpoint, stuff begins to line up better, with all of those moments with Chloe meaning something different, how the game lets you soak in a moment. Even if the game is disappointing as a choose-your-own-adventure title, you can still see the humanity and message behind it, exquisitely delivered in a manner easy to understand. Life is Strange is a game about learning to go with the flow. Or about life being strange or something, I don't know, I lost the plot about chapter 1, so... After this point, Life is Strange 2, or as dubbed by the fans, Life is Still Strange, was all but confirmed. The first game was a smashing success. It managed to scratch the itch Delta left on some Walking Dead fans. And I remember myself, as well as many other fans I interacted at the time with, being excited for the sequel. Consensus was that even if Life is Strange had some elements where its brilliance wavered, the thematic and emotional weight of the story resonated with a lot of people. Surely the developers would bring those elements back to do them even better for the next game, right? Now that they had more experience and could build the game more delicately. Two of the matters of high discussion were if you'd get to play as Max again and if we'd get to see more powers being used for decision-making gameplay intelligently. The first game delivered on that message about acceptance so efficiently that redoing it again would not hit the same way. And after about a year of soft confirmation of the game, and hard confirmation that the lack of Max and Chloe would play a part, things were looking up. The game got its first trailer in May of 2017, as well as the confirmation that 2 spin-off games would be created and released in close proximity. One following Chloe and Rachel's relationship before the start of the story, and a short teaser story that would tie into the plot of the proper Life is Strange 2. These games were meh. It wasn't much of a surprise when it comes to Captain Spirit. The game followed this kid called Chris, who tried making a superhero suit as his abusive dad sleeps in the next room of the house. Although it explored some themes that eventually played a part in Life is Strange 2, it was clearly meant to tease the visual upgrades that would be present in the title, as well as some of the themes. People mostly talked about the end of the game, where telekinetic powers hit the protagonist, and there was a lot of speculation about that, but the reality ended up being kind of underwhelming. Even though a large plot point in Captain Spirit was the death of Chris's mother, she is never brought up again in the actual game, and the decision making in it is also mostly lackluster, but that's not because there's no choices, but rather because the game is pretty short, that literally wakes up on a real life timer of 21 minutes or something like that. You know what was pretty cool about this? Hot Dog Man Mustard Party 2. Oh man, Hot Dog Man Mustard Party 2 was such a good game. You play as Hot Dog Man and you throw a mustard party and it's a sequel. Oh boy, I'm so excited to pretend that my dad doesn't abuse me to this random lady that appears at the door. That's what Hot Dog Man would do, especially at the second mustard party. Okay, jokes aside, I actually think the story in Captain Spirit is like pretty good on its own. It explores child abuse to a poignant degree by making Chris's dad down to earth. He's not comically abusive and oftentimes even plays and jokes with Chris, and the game slowly starts discussing all of the abuse he's experienced through the details you find around the house, which is actually insane in terms of visually showing the story through intricate details. It communicates stuff subtly, like revealing how Chris's fantasy playtime is actually a coping mechanism. It is the way Life is Strange 2 would handle emotional storytelling, and is so immersive that I've heard people seeing their own experience with abuse in it and like being unable to play it. So, gameplay, not impressive, but story, that's banger. Before the Storm instead was a 3-chapter prequel where your superpower is backtalk. Like, the game's gimmick is pretending to be an insufferable teenage girl and trying to manipulate people. Chloe haters were given a lot of ammo by this game, I guess. For starters, the whole mechanic is forced. The dialogue even outside of these segments makes your bones ache and your hopes for the second game give you a fever and shakes. At least it's better now that the slang is also perceived as dated, but it's still kinda bad. I think BTS suffers from 2 main problems. The first is how evidently it is an afterthought. The events of the story just seem inconsequential all the time. They have their emotional impact, but most characters aren't explored that deeply, and you already know where the story is going to go, since, you know, you have to get to the point where stuff was in list 1. The choices are illusory again, and gameplay isn't really fun, with an attempt to recreate the first game's optional photo mechanic with graffiti, but in a way that's evidently forced and just kinda lame. She just writes stuff on the walls. It just didn't work, at least not for a large subsegment of players. The second thing was the way Rachel was written into the story. After spending a lot of the first game looking for her trail and having her be hyped up as this character that resonated with Chloe almost as much, if not more than Max, only for it to be revealed that their relationship had almost no history, it was just kinda heartbreaking, especially when you see the dynamic was not a partner dynamic, or even one that pushed them into interesting scenarios, but rather a puppy-owner dynamic, where you play as a puppy. Rachel literally uses everyone around her, and the game is kinda asking you to play along in a way that doesn't really work, because Rachel is just kinda not cool. It's essentially a choice-making game in a paranormal universe where you don't have paranormal powers, and your choices are barely yours. And I'm not even getting into the absolute mountain of plot holes this ended up bringing up. Some dates are completely wrong. It's just a mess and I don't really want to talk about it. I've got 3 whole other games to go over. So let's talk about the sequel! Life is Strange 2 released for 5 chapters, and it didn't make nearly the same amount of splash the first one did. For a few reasons. I think primarily was the fact that the protagonists are running away from the police the entire game, so characters don't tend to react to your prior actions. They are quite literally not there to. This can make some players feel like the entire game is coated in this bittersweet atmosphere when they get attached to a character and have to leave before we get to know them. Cutting for some, but in my experience I sorta just couldn't bother to care by chapter 3, which is a shame because that chapter is actually one of the most in-depth chapters in the game, and maybe in Life is Strange as a whole, including multiple branching paths and probably the most important choice in the game, which is whether you're gay or straight. I digress. I'm getting to how I didn't feel a connection to most important characters, nor that I care about the decisions I made that could affect them. Instead, this game features a more complex relationship system between the two main protagonists, Sean and Daniel, where you play as Sean, who is a closeted furry, and Daniel, who is a child psychic. I think this is the most interesting part about this second game, because instead of tracking your decisions with a later defined consequence, the game simply keeps track via a point system regarding how you act around Daniel. Some actions affect his moral views, some his affection for you, some his confidence in his telekinetic powers, and a few other things such as whether he gets to swear or steal on his own are tracked. Really, the only one that I feel matters is the one that affects which ending you get, which is the first one. Not even two of them. Like, this system is super interesting and leads to a bunch of different effects, but most of those effects just change minor dialogue or events. They don't have tangible repercussions that end up becoming more than a boolean switch of whether to render a dick in the kid's backpack or not. So while the game feels like your choices don't matter and like there's a certain lack of depth, this is actually the way I think more choose-your-own-adventure games should track your decisions. The problem here is not the system, but rather the execution. By the way, the trait that affects the ending ends up being morality, which is another problem unto itself because even though the player has no way of knowing it while they play, the game isn't exactly consistent about the way it tracks morality. Sometimes the game awards PD points for helping Daniel with the dishes, other time it punishes throwing snow on a guy about as much as it punishes actions such as beating up a guy and robbing him, letting Daniel kill an animal in revenge, participating in a heist that will surely not lead to any further moral dilemmas, and telling him not to save a guy who is about to die. How? I know I'm retrospecting about a game, I'm not really talking about game design, but I just gotta do it. Fuck off, Finn! Fuck off, Cassidy! I am choosing to fuck game design tonight, boys! They are way harder than you! Not this, Cassie, you're good, baby. The design of these parameters is extremely lackluster. Some parameters like the dev score don't get used after chapter 1. The brothership parameter doesn't affect whether Daniel can get you killed in one of the endings, and there's some strange feedback loops where the game hands rewards to you for its convenience. One of the outcomes lets you sacrifice your moral score down to -1 in order to raise Daniel's confidence enough to protect this kid, and the developers realized, so they just found an excuse to raise it back to 2. I understand why they did it, but it's kind of fake. And again, this is all the game's inner count. The player will have no idea any of this is happening except from some cute-ass wolf icons telling you which brother the choice applies to whenever one is made. So yeah, actually a banger concept that sadly goes a little underused. I don't want to analyze every choice in the game, but your other scores do have a way to influence the morality score in certain scenarios, so it's not like the idea was horribly made or terribly designed, rather that the execution was bad in feeling rather boolean. I've played individual novels where my choices may be less important and yet still have more tangible effects. I also hate how the telekinetic abilities don't really change or stray from the typical genre formats the way rewinding did. That extra layer is replaced with an invisible, unreliable system that you'll only get a big idea about as you play the game. Something was taken away by not letting the player handle the supernatural ability, but I also don't think that in itself was a flawed concept. Again, while the concept is really good in theory, the execution is the problem. It is insufficient to make the idea shine. Thematically, the game also happens to be weaker than the first. It does have some awesome elements where it was discussing police brutality before that was a point of contention, but the coming of age is nowhere to be seen. You're just straight up dad immediately, though it feels more like babysitter, and it sucks that Daniel only is influenced by whatever you do regardless of what he sees in other characters, an element that straight up becomes a half-baked plot point in chapter 4. You'd assume this would be exceptional for a coming-of-age story. Your character doesn't even get to come of age because they have to be an adult now, but the game only touches onto this tangentially. It's all about educating Daniel, which ultimately takes away from Sean's own depth. He barely expresses what he feels around the situation, and he is in a situation. Most Critical would do a video about it. Sean gets constantly beat up, has to abandon the people he meets, gets saddled with all of this responsibility of anything Daniel may do, so now his personality is either a punching bag or tap water. And I hope someone appreciates that metaphor because I don't feel like explaining it. In fact, I don't even know how to explain it because it's been a while since I wrote this. I should have explained it, goddamn. List 2 may have been a complex game that didn't display its complexity to the more casual and typical player. It succeeded on improving a lot of the visual elements on the first game. Seriously, this game can be fucking stunning. Look at this canyon scene. And the story is actually still emotionally strong. The bond between the two main leads is compelling, and it's complex, but don't know if I would say fun. Sadly, the feeling of nostalgia and atmosphere aren't quite living up to what you'd expect out of Liz, but where it certainly failed at was in feeling different than any other choose-your-own-adventure titles releasing at this time. downright lacking the cliffhangers that brought so much of the original fanbase into the franchise. So while the game itself isn't bad, the marketing and events in it don't call for anyone's attention, and the ending is only memorable because of how reductive it feels of the game's actual shape. As a game, it's alright, unless you're one of those people that gets extremely offended whenever someone says America isn't the greatest thing, in which case, avoid this game like the fucking plague. You're gonna be pissed when the stupid Mexican immigrant children take away your jobs and get beat up as a hate crime recurrently. How dare they be an oppressed minority? When I played List 2 and I finished it, I got one of the mid-bad endings, where Daniel kills a bunch of cops, they break through the barrier to Mexico and set up a shop together as the Mexican peso continued to eat shit. 2017 was rough. The other ending I could get is the one where Sean gets JFK, but like on the neck, like a little a little peck, a little JFK peck. That is definitely the worst ending in the game, and although there's an ending where the boys manage to leave in peace eventually, I didn't have any drive to get it. Just like Sean, after he gets shot and he can't drive anymore. Why am I this fucking rude about it? I'm doing that thing where I write at 4 AM and stupid shit starts pouring out my mouth and fingers. A quick sleep later. That brings up to now. Since 2019, when this chapter came out after a bunch of delays that didn't make it easy, I really just sort of lost interest in Life is Strange as a franchise, to the point where I didn't even know a 4th game was announced and fully released until I saw a YouTube short talking about Max making a choice and didn't recall from the original. I saw the trailer for the 3rd, but like many people who also used to be fans of the IP, there was just no desire to play it, partially because of the slow decline in interest I experienced as 2 released, but also partially because Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 4 sort of took the spotlight and ran with it. Even exploring elements about The Walking Dead which nobody touches upon, like having James, who is a character that talks about the possibility of zombies being more conscious that they appear. It's worth mentioning that Telltale went bankrupt even before the release of the last 2 episodes of The Walking Dead game, so shit was harsh. At the same time, 2018 released Quantic's 3rd game, Detroit Become Human, which to this date I haven't played because I'm too broke for a console that's capable of running it. But I've certainly seen a lot of the more fortunate content creators going through it. This here is the Steam page with every flowchart in the game. And it's insane how many choices, endings, and outcomes this game has. There's 4 hours and a half of just ending sequences here, as every character's story is struck separately and has, no joke, like 40 minutes of actual ending stage. The genre has not surpassed it, and I'm not sure if it's economically viable for it to do so in the near future. Quantic has been stuck doing a Star Wars game for years, and their work environment isn't the type of place a guy who is very much into game development like me would advocate for. Point is, choose your own adventure games really went out of style in 2020, and so Download was forced to step down from creating the titles, with work going instead to the company Tech9, known as the company behind Madagascar 2 Escape from Africa for the PS2. And in realizing nobody had really made a serious retrospective on Life is Strange, I said, you know, this is the perfect opportunity to justify playing video games as work for the next week. From here on out, I'm talking about games as someone who experienced them in 2025, like a week ago, very much not around the release times. Life is Strange True Colors makes you wonder one big important question. Is life strange? In this game, you play as Alex, a girl who's been passed around from orphanage to orphanage because her empath powers make her extremely susceptible to strong emotions. This basically means everyone thinks she sucks ass. This game takes place in the town of Heaven, not where dead people go. They drop the springs from the name most of the times for some reason, but it's Spring Heavens, okay? Good news is that unlike 2, you don't even move around in this game. In fact, you move around so little that one of the notable parts about this game is that you have a handful at most of explorable locations. Perhaps like 16? That also comes with the game lasting about 11 hours for me. I'm typically a slow player, which makes the budget cuts from prior titles all the more evident. Simply put, this game probably had very little budget to go around, probably with all the mocap and music licensing and whatnot, and some people would probably complain about that. I certainly could, because the game's scope does hurt the overall experience, but it's clear this game chose to prioritize the emotional impact rather than anything the prior 2 had the opportunity to deliver on. The big advantage of this is that getting attached to characters this time around is super easy. They get more emotionally compelling moments and recur throughout the entire game. Simply put, I actually really like this game's story. It has a cozy and homey feel, and a ton of moments where I genuinely commended the writers for being able to capture and communicate the nuisance of like super specific situations. One highlight being Charlotte's character, which is first and foremost a combo of words I would have pronounced wrong a year ago for sure, and second, a character who explains the themes of hatred and anger to a cutting degree. This aspect of the game I really enjoyed. So I'm editing this video and I say Forestmont instead of foremost while bragging about how my pronunciation has gotten so much better. I am such a failure at this voiceover shit. The visuals of the game sadly were a little nerfed on my end because unlike prior installments, my PC isn't able to run this game in particularly good quality. I tried capturing footage of my playthrough and this is how it came out. Please support the channel so I can afford a PC that doesn't shit itself running Celeste. But the actual game's visual department is genuinely great. This game probably features some of the coolest environments in the Life is Strange series, thanks to how the empathy mechanic literally transports you to an exaggerated version of that person's perspective of their surroundings, and this range from a colored filter to actually transporting you to a whole different location and adding a bunch of cool ass visual effects. I think these are the moments where this game peaks, because beyond the actual emotional impact of the story and the absolutely amazing presentation that is nothing but on par with the rest of the franchise, this game begins to crumble apart with their approach to the decision making and gameplay. This game treats player choice with a disregard that you slowly start picking up even in your own first playthrough. Early on there's this guy called Mac who the game is constantly trying to antagonize as the worst piece of shit in the planet when every problematic thing he does is just something stupid. He's just a stupid guy making stupid mistakes. Come episode 4 and despite the fact that my player choices got him to keep his relationship, as well as that of hot water at work because I'm just that much of a Chad, none of the characters mention him, as if he just disappeared from the story. Almost every choice in the game is like that, except for exactly 3 choices, and that's genuinely disappointing. Instead of building from the illusion of high impact of 1, or the complicated relationship system in 2, we get Boolean relationships that come down to a switch of whether you did something or other, and it's clear even in your first playthrough that every dialogue choice you make is written to sound like a compelling, objectively correct choice. By the end of the game, it just becomes so normalized for you to just pick whatever because quite literally doesn't matter. Hold on, we need a comprehensible example so you can understand what I mean. So imagine there's like this character who shows up and says, I hate spaghetti, but I love pizza. What do you want to go eat? And you say, pizza, and they go, yay, and you say spaghetti, and they go, the fuck pizza, that I was joking, pizza's always bad, I'm a spaghetti fan #1. That's the kind of dialogue that this game has, which is sort of infuriating and kind of a little bit disappointing. Big choices instead suffer from the opposite, where there's really only one scenario where the choice wasn't evident, and sadly that choice, which the game lets you mess up once per chapter, only ends up changing like 2 lines of dialogue. And even all of that doesn't matter since the game has 2 endings you directly choose at the very end. Well, maybe like 4, because you can choose your crush, but same shit. But the disappointing part about this is that at the end of the game, like, all your choices are tallied up in this scene where a bunch of people you've seen throughout the game are sitting down to make a decision. You come in all busted up, you tell them, hey, this company's shady, we should not put them in charge of the town. Whether they believe you or not is based on if you did that event that sets their Boolean opinion of you to a positive one. It would have been so easy and cool to bifurcate to a 3rd ending if at least half of them had a negative opinion, and that would instantly give all the choices you make throughout the game more importance. It's baffling to me that they didn't do it initially, though I assume it's simply due to the budget constraints. I do like how this game's method of picking your sexuality is a lot more natural than in List 2. It actually made me laugh how they handled it instead of the pain the other one caused. Something that particularly disappointed me is that Alex's emotion powers don't really change even remotely how you approach almost any problem in the game. Any choices that exist because of the power are a result of using said power as a narrative tool, and thus even if you once again control the superpowered lesbian, the dimension that originally attracted players to the first game is still nowhere to be seen. Whichever character, being angry or scared, won't really change how I approach making a decision. Heck, there's not even an instance where I can unlock an alternative choice, which is generally a missed opportunity. The matter of the powers themselves also was a source of disappointment for me. Despite being visually interesting, the emotions you get to tap into are very overtly simplified cardinals. There's no instances where the characters felt multiple emotions or even something more specific than sad, angry, happy, and I'm movie, despite the game having multiple points where it could happen. There's a betrayal secret bad guy plot which is very unsubtly hinted at by the game, and when the character's about to shoot the protagonist, apparently they just feel sad instead of a mangle of complex emotions. It feels like the power unintentionally caricaturized the entire game. There's a good chance to mention that this game's cliffhangers can be pretty weak, except for the one at the end of chapter 4. Probably the favorite one since like the end of chapter 2 in Life is Strange 1. Yeah, this game didn't release by chapters anyway, so there's no reason for this to matter anymore. At least the limited scope of the story makes the lack of impact in the decision making slightly mitigated. I do think it's unfair to compare this title with Detroit because this game clearly doesn't intend in the slightest to make you think your decisions affect the story into wholly different directions like the others. I would have liked to have the bad ending if you neglected the townsfolk because it would fit the game's narrative, but at its scope, the lack of impact doesn't feel as bothersome. Alas, this game shows the decline of a few elements in the Life is Strange series that I feel are kinda pivotal. Mainly, does this game really feel strange? And I don't mean that in the sense that I'm making fun of the title, though that's really funny. I mean it in the sense that the moral conundrums this game puts you through are just awkwardly normal. A game ago, I was running from the police across the country, meeting my estranged mother and helping my brother escape from a cult. And 2 games ago, I was trying to convince a girl I hate that she's the target of a criminal only for her to walk right into the criminal's hands because I gave a shit about her. And here, you're wondering whether you should tell this girl that's about to go to college that her mother has secret Alzheimer's? Still a conundrum, but when I imagine some people encounter in real life, that barely gets me to think about morality in any particularly special way. It just is. The strangest part about this game is that Alex doesn't know that stolen evidence is inadmissible in court. Girl, when I was 21, I already knew that shit from watching TV. Even the schemes in this game feel normal. You're just living a normal life for a huge portion of this game, which feels strange, but in the wrong way. I want to reiterate that I still think this is one of the better games in the Life is Strange series. It's my second favorite, but I don't know, it doesn't really have that whimsy. Sure, I kind of appreciated the slower pace and more standard vibe, but I don't feel like it, conveys what Life is Strange is about. Either way, the game being relatively unimpressive and uninspiring led to it just not making any noise, which didn't bring the fans back after the long hiatus and less than stellar second season. I like it more than season 2, but not for the reasons why I like season 1 on a fundamental level, and it seems I was not the only one, as people online tend to also have a generally mixed opinion about it. Tech9 clearly attempted to find ways to milk Life is Strange, releasing remasters of Life is Strange 1, Before the Storm, as well as True Colors for a $60 price point. They even announced a DLC before the game even released in the form of Step Story, which I decided not to talk about here, or the Farewell DLC, because I value your time, and they are, as I've said like 3 times already in this video in a nutshell, emotional but unremarkable. This led to a lot of people distrusting Tech9, who before this had only really made Before the Storm. These remasters weren't spectacular, losing a lot of the color and visual flair of the original for a visual upgrade that was generally unnecessary and not that impressive. I definitely think the remasters look better in many regards and I would recommend them for new players, as well as having other bonuses, but it doesn't extend or improve onto the original. It's exactly an agreeable remaster of a game that was already backwards compatible on the systems it's available for. And then, to top it all off, the next game for Life is Strange was announced as Life is Strange Double Exposure, a new adventure with Mox Caulfield once again taking the role of the protagonist, but with a new power, allowing her to cross into a different timeline. And then I saw this game on the YouTube short that I mentioned earlier. First off, I was pissed off and angry because that was not the short I clicked for. YouTube's shorts on PC are just coded like shit. But okay, I saw this, was intrigued, and I looked up the trailer. What I saw poked my curiosity, but I was also kind of unimpressed. It seems rather desperate for them to literally try to catch thunder again at the realization that the only Life is Strange game that has sold fucking buckets was the first. It didn't feel like this was going to be Max's story, but rather some other girl that just has her name for marketing purposes. Will it be? I don't know. I have to play the game. Like, I actually already played the game, but I haven't played the game yet. At the same time, it's like Schrodinger's game, but in a script to YouTube video pipeline. And like, it's downloading as I type this, but not as I say this. Even, making YouTube videos is weird. Thank you for letting me do this weird thing for a living through your support. I love doing it. Actually, that wasn't bad at all. It has some messy writing, but they actually justified bringing Max back way more than I expected. And this time I got the game on Switch so I can record it myself and bring you what's possibly the worst footage you'll see of this game. There's this scene where they're in a dark room and it actually looks horrible. What? Oh, okay. In this game we follow Max. She is finally healing from her repressed Blackwell trauma with her newest friend, Safi, who is promptly murdered, leading to Max discovering that her powers now let her travel between 2 realities that bifurcate the moment Safi died, and so she attempts to investigate the murder to stop the alive Safi from getting killed. I will be discussing spoilers spoilers for this game as I with the prior ones, but I think awarding is in order for those who just are interested. I think the main problem I notice here is that the problems from True Colors are present here in all their glory, with not a single one being fixed. The powers once again only cause narrative effects without any changes to the gameplay. At least this time around you can overhear people in one timeline and use that information in the other timeline. Whatever. The environments are still the same 8 to 12 being revisited over and over and over, and sometimes they change very little, but they change. To the point where they sometimes take away from important moments in the story, such as when you're trying to openly cancel one of the teachers at the big party that the entire university throws and supposedly everybody's there and there's just like 12 people there in actuality. Remember that one scene in the first game where you went to a club and despite being relatively empty, it still felt like a party? Not to mention that it had the excuse that this was not like a party for adults, so it makes sense for only a few teenagers from the small town being there. Whatever. If there's one problem with 3 that I didn't feel with this one, is that aspect about the normality of the story. I do feel like the timeline shifting has a real effect on the situations we see. On the flip side, the surreal imagery is less impressive and far less common, with only 2 instances where I actually looked in all at the visuals, those being the funny hotel with this funny wall I can clip my camera into, and the first time I saw the typhoon in action. The normal environments in contrast do keep pace and even surpass those we've seen in the franchise. Compared to the other titles, it improves some aspects and completely murders some others. For example, this game has probably my favorite reflection moment in the whole franchise, where Max gets sleepy in this weird dream hotel room, and the music and shading of the scene works really efficiently. I actually sat there for a while. 10 out of 10 music choice. I listened to that whole album the same day. During to the choosing, and you see that your decisions barely fucking matter in the outcome of the story. Some things change, but you still have the same gameplay experience in most situations. It feels weird, particularly when there's an occasional choice that doesn't even matter, because they absolutely force themselves to downplay any dialogue or explanation regarding those events. I think the obvious one is the one where the game lets you choose whether Chloe died or you broke up with her at some point in the story, and it's like a really badly telegraphed choice, which means dialogue regarding Chloe can seem either dismissive if she's dead or overplayed if you simply broke up with her after destroying the entirety of Arcadia Bay for her. You know, that's it's just not good, and the game punishes none of the bad decision making beyond the immediate dialogue interaction. Some choices confused me a lot, like you can choose to romance this guy Ben, but he's a mess in either timeline, and I don't see any player wanting to associate with him considering he's an asshole in both, just more in one than in the other. He's written rather inconsistently, which just made him annoying to deal with, and his flirting compared to the other love interests is like super casual and spontaneous. He's the kind of guy like who would you fuck, marry, and kill? And then the other guy is like, okay, I need to set up boundaries, they're really important to me. I don't really get that, which extends to a bigger issue of this title. The story has a mountain of good elements, but they are topped off with melted plot holes and issues and a cherry on top. They changed Max's power for the sake of convenience. Safi disappears for most of the game despite being a central character. They mention repeatedly how good this guy Reggie is at taking pictures, but we never see those pictures. There's this girl Loretta who is like super mean at the start of the game, and then her personality takes a super hard shift after chapter 1. There's the introduction of this detective character who exists for like an hour before being written off from the story, and he's literally erased from history with only a few textual lines, not even dialogue, text, mentioning what the fuck happened while also not explaining anything at all. Like, it doesn't become relevant in the future. It's not. He disappears because he touches a version of himself from the past, not from another timeline, so it doesn't make sense that he disappeared. What did you actually If you choose to break up with Chloe, it happens because of something Max did with her powers, even though the game thoroughly establishes that she hasn't used them since then, while also adding a layer of Chloe moving on but Max being unable to, the Polaroid collectibles, which are unarguably an ass pull, Safi's powers going out of control causing the typhoon, even though the typhoon in the first game was a result of butterfly effect, not because like the powers were getting out of control. The cherry on top I mentioned is how Safi doesn't use her powers to just get Lucas fucked up the academy the easy way. It makes sense that she shapeshifts into Gwen and pretends to deal drugs because saddling a trans person with a public indecency charge could easily have repercussions on other LGBT+ members in the school. But Lucas is a heterosexual white male. This sounds kind of fucked up of me, and it is a little, but shapeshifting's already shifty. It's literally in the name. If she really wanted to drag his reputation, all she had to do was shapeshift into him naked and just flail it around campus while playing Coldplay music. Dun, dun. Okay, enough about story. Let's talk about gameplay. I think this game suffers from really horrible pacing. The puzzles here are a lot more involved than they were in prior games, and that's enjoyable, but having to shift between realities all the time and the sheer amount of puzzles that happen in the same locations just make this game a slog to experience. The puzzles where you must look into the other reality as you do something or eavesdrop work well, but when you gotta bring something from one reality to another, you're really just walking to the inconveniently placed ship spots and back. It gets boring quickly, and most of the puzzles are literally inconsequential to any scenes in the game and just work as things that change conversation between two minor characters in the background. But above all, the real problem with this, which is gonna tie up the structure of this video, is the central theme this game never stops trying to remind you of. Dude, Life is Strange happened! This game is just obsessed with reminding you about what made the franchise interesting when it initially came out. It tries, and fails very pathetically, to catch that same thunder, and it does this by trying to remind you of elements from the original game non-stop, not just with Chloe and other characters, but also references, reused mechanics, character archetypes, plot structures, scenes that very softly explore Max's trauma, the setting. It's absolutely desperate for you to approve of it like you did with the first game. Life is Strange Double Exposure, while not a bad game or story, just doesn't sit right as part of Life is Strange. Not to casual players like me, not to the fans, not to the story and themes of the game that inspired it most. As I was looking into this game's reception, I noticed that not only did the game sell particularly bad due to the lack of marketing, as well as loss of market interest, but also that the fans didn't really jive with it. An argument I heard a lot is that the game doesn't fundamentally make sense because of the picture showing Max about to shoot Safi, when that all just kinda works out. Max follows past Safi up to the Outlook, future Safi takes the picture of future Max, past Max hears a gunshot, which is future Max shooting future Safi and creating the divided timeline. Past Max sees past Safi safely walking up the Overlook, and that's when future Max swaps future Safi's corpse with a living Safi from the past. This is kinda why the developers don't let you choose to shoot her in the game as a decision, because that means future Max would just fix the paradox and then nothing happens. Safi isn't in any real danger because the danger was the you who didn't know that, so... And they kinda couldn't do chapter 5 and then tease a sequel under that scenario. Holy fuck, I'm talking about the plot again. If I keep this up, I'm gonna get a nosebleed. I'm taking the executive decision to fast forward beyond this segment. And who knows, maybe the Lost Records is able to capture one— Whoa, way too far ahead. Back it up. Why are we still getting Life is Strange titles? From this video, you can kinda tell that despite the games having ups and downs as video games, each game seems to have less budget and sell worse. 2 sold 5 times less than the first, and then True Colors sold a third less, and then Double Exposure, half of that. At this rate, the next title will sell something like 100,000 copies, which is still a lot, but nothing remotely compared to the millions the original seems to have sold. This is typical of most franchises that aren't breakout hits, but there's a point where maybe you gotta let it die? The budget of these games seems to be lower every time, partly in preparation for the game to follow the pattern and sell less, but also because the technologies it uses just keep getting more complicated and more expensive. I can't imagine it's cheap to capture hours upon hours of motion and facial movement, which would be difficult and time-consuming to manually craft. The cost of production for the latest game and the sale portions being so low that Tech9 had to lay off employees earlier this year, leaving the franchise up in the air considering Square Enix London has 2 active franchises and this is one of them. They're likely to try again to sell us future titles, partly by getting more desperate and trying even harder to capture what the first achieved, which may lead to disastrous results. I hope that doesn't happen. I suppose trust in this franchise has run wild because of just how much Liz 1 overperformed. It set expectations extremely high for everyone regarding the IP, whether it's that game's story quality and management of relationships, which ultimately won't resonate with all players now that it's a completed product, or its actual market performance, which seems to have kept the developers' interest even with the huge decline the genre has seen in the past 2 years. This is likely why they keep making the games. New fans and returning fans periodically keep the first 2 titles and the newer 2 producing money for the IP holders. Liz 1 was so absolutely massive that it offsets the production costs of new titles, regardless of if it's because the producers still hope they can get something like it to occur again or simply to retain those overtime players. A more likely situation may be that Square Enix decides to keep the franchise on ice for 10 years and hope there's either a new rise in general popularity or the opportunity to leverage nostalgia after such a long hiatus, even if that means they decide to write off a few things from Double Exposure in order to do nostalgia maxing. On that note, a big fundamental problem with Life is Strange design-wise is just how easy it is to vicariously play through the game thanks to content creators, who cover the whole game easily in almost the same state any other player would. In order to take this franchise back into the limelight without resorting to cheap tactics and luck, a complete design restructure would have to take place, I think. Move the games into a direction that gives players a different experience if they get to control the game themselves, something that I feel the first game could be argued to have done, but that's about it. Quote-unquote, fixing Life is Strange would require far more money than its developers seem to have at their disposal, and the game feeling stuck in every element, design, story, gameplay, kinda directs us to the existence of only one ultimate solution that is kinda painful. We must sacrifice Life is Strange. It kinda sucks to admit because I actually like the games, they're really cool, it's a cool franchise, but I think the franchise should die, particularly because at some fundamental level, I think this franchise lost its magic. I could do mental gymnastics to explain why we're still getting more games. Maybe it's the fans, maybe the games perform better, maybe my ideas of how to fix the franchise's flaws are stupid and there's a better solution, but that doesn't matter. Much like choices in the games, it all leads to one final decision that is more likely to be tragic than not. You see, I grew up with these games. I may be several years younger than Max and the other protagonists are, except for Sean, he's closest to my age, but I think part of what I feel was enjoyable about the games was its ability to capture what it felt like to be young and do weird shit with your life, how figuring yourself out was an adventure unto itself that most often involved fucking up and losing in the end, and just letting those mistakes be mistakes. As I grow older, I realize I'm done with that. I'm still a person with my depth and all, but my chance to fuck up and move on has already passed. And I don't mean to say this as if to say I can't fuck up anymore because now I'm an adult. I mean it in the sense that my life no longer retains that excitement from when I was younger. If we're being honest, there's no bigger fuck up than deciding to do YouTube with my life during my young adult years, but what I'm getting at is that figuring myself and the world out no longer gives me that kick of emotion that it used to. There was a point during high school where I said, fuck it, I'm gonna go full goober mode even if that makes me a weirdo and nobody likes me, because I like myself. And I remember that taking that step and starting to act that way fucking invigorated me. It felt so right. And then now I make the same kind of realizations and it's just so normal. I figured myself out several times throughout the years to the scope that I no longer feel like it's a new strange sensation. It is different, but just not the same. That kinda reminds me of the games. How when the first one came out it was new and it felt so open, and then time started passing and the second and third game did the same, and at some point during the mess the walls crumbled further and further until now. The genre grew older and we all know all of its tricks, leaving something that feels, above all, normal. Life was strange. It no longer is, not in the same way. There's always new stuff that I don't understand, but what I do understand now is that eventually all of those new things will become familiar and expected. At least until I'm too old to keep up and start finding being out of the loop as just another form of normality. It's not just that the games have not been able to recapture that feeling, it's that the players, or at least me, no longer have an abnormal expectation, or the ability to hop into the character's shoes and remember those emotions even as echoes of themselves. And thus, life became no longer strange. That's why I think Life is Strange should just be let go. Not just for the sake of the games, which seem to be nosediving into a void of unpopularity, but also for me. I don't want to remember how dull and occasionally unexciting life has become. There are still new games. Bloom and Rage: The Lost Records came out recently, and who knows, maybe The Lost Records is able to capture once again that feeling for a whole generation of players, as I don't think my generation has anything to do with this anymore, so that will be theirs to enjoy. And hopefully, they feel what I felt in both Life is Strange and Real Life while I was experiencing the titles in their heyday. For all I know, 10 years from now I'll be seeing someone talk about how they bloomed and no longer rage with the same on-the-noseness that I used for this video, but for the moment, all I can suggest to shake off my negative emotion is a big generous donation on Super Chat so I can afford a trip to the Bahamas and maybe give myself a little adventure back. Heaven knows I need it. I just wrote 10,000 words on a 10-year-old gaming franchise after binging it for a week straight and I realized I haven't drank any water in the whole time. Oh my god!